Hey, welcome to the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim, JR, taking a break tonight. But I got my man, Larry K from Night Watch. Larry, you ready to drop some knowledge about Rutgers for us?
I stay dropping knowledge about Rutgers, and I am more than happy to do it on the Big Ten Huddle with my boy, Zach. As always, it's a pleasure to be with you, my friend.
Yeah, it's a joy. Larry, we get to chat maybe once a quarter.
Yeah.
And I love every time, whether I'm on your show or you're coming on here, I feel like you are the man that knows Rutgers inside and out, which I know a lot of our viewers love because, especially as Rutgers has kind of ascended over the past couple years, there has been a lot to be excited about. And this is, I think, the first time in a while you've been on a live show. So we've got Billy Tuesday in the chat saying, "Hey, Zach and Larry."
Billy
Billy,
Tuesday, what's up?
Thanks for being here. Philip with the representing the Illini, ILL, INI. I'll finish that for you. But Larry, just before we get into it, man, how has it been? It's been a crazy year for Rutgers and for you. How have you been?
I have been good. As I was telling you behind the scenes, just crossed a milestone. Not going to share that with the whole world, but I'm doing well in general. Rutgers a whirlwind a year. Night Watch, my channel, did just hit 1,000 subscribers recently.
Woo! There we go.
That's a huge celebration. I owe part of it to the College Huddle, to the Big Ten Huddle, to you, my friend, to the collaborations we've done and the people we've reached. So I've had a great time covering Rutgers and being in this community with you and all these other guys who are content creators and report on these teams, regardless of some of Rutgers, on and off success or lack of success on the hardwood and on the football field. So it's been fun. I've been good, and it's great to be back with you, and it's great to talk about the Big Ten and Rutgers.
Yeah, and I think to that point, remember, obviously like and subscribe here, but go and support Larry at Night Watch. I think the best Rutgers content you can find. Go subscribe on YouTube. Go follow on Apple and Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you are following Larry K. Night Watch. Great stuff. And I remember I think I was talking with Eric from the OHO podcast, and we're like, how do you not have a bigger following? Because the way you break down stuff is just awesome. So we're just really grateful to have you part of the College Huddle Network, and obviously just great to have you as a friend. So, do you want to dive right in?
Sure. Let's take the dive right now. I'm ready.
All right. Well, so I think Rutgers was such an interesting follow this year. I'll say follow because the hype was just surreal, right? Like, I think you came on my old show, Big Ten Football Talk, and we said, is 9 or even 10 wins possible?
Yeah, that's where we were.
And I think there's a lot of hype around Rutgers, a lot of hype that Kaliak-Manis was reuniting with Kurt Soraka. And then you had a bunch of injuries. And there was that lull in the middle of the season. But here's the thing. You guys still went to a bowl game. You were still above 500 for the third time in your Big Ten history. Yes. So, it's still an accomplishment. And so I think there is this struggle. It's a struggle for me to wrap my head around what to make of Rutgers and their season this past year. And so I want to get your thoughts, maybe just from your perspective and even from how the program views it. Was this season, was it a flop? Was it a success? What was it? What is it? How should we view this past year?
So I'll kind of take you through. I mean, when we were talking about the predictions and it might have been Eric, it might have been JR, I forget who it was. Somebody said, can they get to 10? And that was like the title of the segment. And I posted it on my social media. And some of the Jersey, Rutgers haters are like, 10? Are you kidding me? Because they didn't know the ins and outs.
Right.
Now, those of us who were in the know going into the season before the Toure injury, and I know we'll get to that in a little bit, before all these injuries piling up, when you looked at the schedule that Rutgers had and you looked at the returning talent on both sides of the ball, coupled with an upgrade at quarterback in Kaliak-Manis, there was some – if you really went game by game, I didn't predict 10. I predicted 9 And if you go game by game, it was feasible. Now you look at the way the season shook out, and you see that yes, you lose to Nebraska on the road, by a touchdown. You hold the quarterback to virtually nothing. A guy who was highly touted in an offense that was supposed to be so great going into that game, but Rutgers can't do anything offensively. You have an absolute blunder against the Illini at home.
Mhm.
Was and not to relive it too much, but for those who don't recall, I mean, you had a game where Rutgers was pretty dominant for a lot of the game. The Illini marched back towards in the second half. There was an interception, initially called an interception on the field that would have sealed the game for the Illini. It gets called back, and instead Rutgers keeps the ball. Callie McManus marches them down the field, gets two fourth down scrambles to keep the drive alive, finds Kyle Monungai for a touchdown. Rutgers is in the lead, and now the clock is winding down. The weather was terrible. Wind swirling around in that stadium, gray skies, cold, just deplorable conditions. The Illini come up. They wind up. Now they're driving pretty good the whole second half. For whatever happens, they are kind of on their heels at the end of the game. They get knocked back on third down, and it's fourth down. They're lining up for a 50-plus yard field goal with the backup kicker in terrible conditions with no timeouts. And you're thinking, wow, we're going to pull this off. And Greg Schiano calls a timeout. The kicker kicks it anyway, misses terribly. And they decide, hey, why are we going to do this again? Let's not do this. Let's send the offense back on the field. The very next play, the Illini score and win. I spent a lot of time on that game, but here's why. The season was very close. So as the season progressed, initially you win some games, but you see some fissures with the injuries, with defensive issues, a little bit with offensive issues that eventually get rectified because some of these young receivers and stuff really step up, and Kyle Monungai does well again. But you're going into the Washington game feeling very good. You beat Washington, which although they were in a down year, it was still a name program, still a runner-up for the season before. It's a big deal. You beat them at home. Rutgers finally gets that, a lot of fanfare going into a night game. They get it. And then you drop 4 straight. And the expectations go from like the conversation that happened around Rutgers land was if you wind up, 6-6 or better, you're basically treading water and you barely survived a catastrophe by the skin of your teeth. If you're under 6-6, it's an absolute abject failure catastrophe. And if you're 7-5, it's still disappointing. And anything above that is still a successful year. Wound up 7-5. And so at that point, I think the fan base, those of us who have these serious conversations and really know what they're looking at, it was a disappointing season and a missed opportunity. It wasn't a catastrophic failure, but it was a huge disappointment, especially when you look at games like Nebraska and Illinois, where you could have pulled it off. And but for a few things here or there, you didn't. You could have turned a season into a significantly impressive season. And here's the thing, Zach. Here's why it's so disappointing. You're not going to have a schedule that fortuitous for the foreseeable future at minimum. So
yeah,
it's a disappointing year, quite frankly. There were a lot of injuries. And I will tell you, and then, not to ramble on, but I will tell you, Schiano has said there were so many injuries piling up, especially on the defensive side of the ball in the first half of that season, that what they were doing was, when a guy would go down, they would try to plug that hole and then plug the other hole. And they were looking at it in a vacuum, right? Like every injury was its own vacuum, plug it, plug it, plug it. And before you knew it, the whole defense kind of spiraled out of control because you're not looking at the big picture. Who do we have? What are our strengths and weaknesses? You're just rushing to plug holes. And then you're like, what do we even have here? They tore it down and rebuilt it. And after that, for the final 4 games, they were in a better position. But it was too little too late with the way things were going. And overall, treaded water, but a big missed opportunity, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just to your point, lost to Nebraska by 7, lost to UCLA by 3, beat Minnesota after that 4-game stretch, which I think a lot of people thought Minnesota, really good team
Mhm.
last year and really elevated. But then, yeah, the loss to Illinois at the end, you're talking about what, 4 games that were 1-score games? I no three 1-score games, 3 1-score losses that I think you guys had.
Yeah.
Um, and then obviously the USC and Wisconsin blowouts. Um, but yeah, like 10 wins, like there is something where you could have seen 10 wins. Let's talk about the injuries though a little bit more, because I think that is something that if you're not paying attention, you don't realize kind of the hospital wing that was Rutgers football. Like who all was down and what was affecting your program?
Well, first of all, Mo Toure goes down going into the season, and that was a guy that was on a lot of people's lists is in the conversation of one of the top linebackers in the Big Ten. So you lose that, and in that linebacker loss, it's not just a second level type guy. This was a guy who was a leading pass rusher too for the team. So the versatility there was really tough to replace. And everybody who knows anything about football, whether you know it on an intimate level in terms of schematics of defenses, schematics of protecting the quarterback and pass protection,
Mhm.
or just as a fan who watches the games enough, without a significant pass rush, you're going to struggle to cover on the back end, and your whole defense is going to struggle, especially as we get into an era where passing the football is so significant. And so losing Mo Toure cannot be understated, and that was at the onset.
Yeah.
You had Tyrene Powell, who wound up getting a contract as an undrafted free agent with New Orleans this offseason, who going into the previous season, a lot of Rutgers fans and people would have thought he's going to continue to develop. He's going to be a draft pick. And the problem was he got hurt actually in the Ohio State game the year before and then suffered another knee injury in the offseason. He did play on and off in the season, but he was never 100%. And this was your second level, sideline to sideline guy with length who could get in there and
Mhm.
mix it up in coverage, who could come up to the line and take on a running back, who could seal the edge, on edge runs. This guy was not 100%. And not to mention he was a leader. So was Mo Toure. So now you're
Yeah.
kind of going on and off with these leaders of the defense. Now, Wesley Bailey, who's probably, 1B to Mo's 1A or at least 2A, he's on and off. And eventually he shuts it down and he decides not to come back to Rutgers. And so there were these massive holes all over the team. The offensive line suffered a number of setbacks. At tackle, you're rotating guys in there. You have redshirt, I think sophomore getting snaps. Some of these guys are struggling a bit. You're kind of rotating different guys to see what they could do. You're changing line combinations. Holland Pierce, obviously the stalwart on the left side, he was there the whole time. And I
Mhm.
think what you also saw was you had Dymere Miller, the wide receiver, who came in and had a pretty good year in the slot, but you went in with Chris Long starting. He takes an injury. You eventually see the ascension of younger receivers, and you see the change in philosophy of Greg Schiano and Kirk Shiraka. Yes, we have this very talented running back, Kyle Monungai, who, by the way, was also banged up, missed a game, missed a other bunch of things, on and off, not 100%. Instead of feeding him the rock nonstop all the time, let's start opening up the offense. We have these 6'3", 6'4" receivers who are
Yeah.
young guys who are blazing, who can make plays. We have this quarterback who knows the offense, who's not scared to sling it. They started doing that, and it got them those 3 wins towards the end of the season. But the
Mhm.
injuries that took place on both sides of the ball, especially and then you had the tight end. We're starting to open up the offense a little bit, and then he goes down, and you have I think we were down to our 4th string tight end at one point because it became almost laughable with, I think when you go into a season, everybody says next man up. That's the mentality. You need the depth. Depth should be ready. Everybody understands that. But the truth of the matter is when you're going into a season and you have a philosophy on both sides of the ball And that philosophy is dependent on certain guys with certain skill sets to execute it, especially at a program like Rutgers, who doesn't have infinite depth by any stretch of the imagination. Schiano says we're a developmental program. We very much are. I think it gets out of hand really fast and starts to snowball. And I think what you saw with Rutgers was the first 4 games was, okay, you have 3 teams that I think you think you're going to beat. Vatek was a situation where we were dominant for most of the beginning of the game, and then it gets a little out of hand again. But Longer Beam makes a great play, who got drafted, going home to Baltimore, to the Ravens. And then we drive it home with a really great play call and another great pass by Kaliak Manis, Ian Strong, that one of those young receivers. Washington was simply, so A, they weren't themselves, but B, they dominated Rutgers in that game, as far as stats are concerned. They shot themselves in the foot a number of times. Now, Rutgers capitalized. But then you saw the second 4 games, the injuries mounted, and Rutgers lost its identity on both sides of the ball, and it was just a skid. What you saw the final 4, and this is why Illinois was so disappointing, because from a football standpoint, they were up to the challenge, but it was a coaching blunder, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Rutgers had kind of collected itself. Like, okay, we have been snowballing with all these injuries and we lost sense of who we are. Who do we have on the roster and what can we put together? And then you saw a different team. But when you have those injuries, Zach, rapid firing on you, Needham, the linemen, you just, it's hard to rebound from. And, Felter, these are serious guys, these lineman maulers that we have. It took Rutgers a long time to build in the trenches to a point where they could be competitive, but they're only at that point at the top end of the depth chart. Other guys stepped up over time, but it was just hard, Zach.
Yeah. I appreciate you connecting the dots there, because I think on one hand, I think everybody would agree that Rutgers does not necessarily have the depth that, like, a Michigan or an Ohio State or an Oregon is going to have. And so I think it's easy to just say, oh, injuries means it's going to be hard. But I appreciate how you connected for us that what that meant wasn't just the lack of depth, but you had to adjust and abandon your identity.
Yeah.
That's really helpful, because what Rutgers was a hard-nosed, run-first, defensive-minded team.
Yes.
And you lost essentially all your defensive leaders, all your pass rushers. Kyle Monangai was banged up, and you had to rely on a quarterback who is, hot and cold, and a group of receivers that is growing, but they're not great. But you had to shift your identity to them. And that, I think, is just helpful to understand, oh, that's how this season got away from the Scarlet Knights. There's a few questions I want to comments and questions I want to get to the chat. First, Billy Tuesday. Larry really knows his Rutgers. Great guess.
Thank you.
I agree. I agree. Thanks for being here. I think Trojan Mitch had a good question that I want to get back to, but I'll put it on your radar now. Will Schiano be on the hot seat if Rutgers goes 4-8? We'll talk about that in the next segment, but I just want to put it on your radar, because I think that is an interesting thing to think about for next year, in terms of even what should we expect. Another question for you, though, Trojan Fight, one of our members, asked, do you think the travel and start of the game, which was 10 p.m. Eastern versus USC, that affected their play? It's the only night game USC got in Big Ten play.
I can't say that it did. I'm not saying that it didn't at all. And obviously, when you have that travel, you have to figure there's some element there that's a disadvantage for the road team. But I didn't necessarily see anything in that game that led me to believe, I can chalk this up to the travel. I mean, I think the matchup was what it was, and the way Rutgers was playing at that time, I think it kind of went as we would have expected it to go. And I think one of the most disappointing things there was when UCLA came to visit Rutgers, how they came out swinging. I understand they had a lot of speed guys and they're really talented in the passing game. And like I talked about on defense with, not having those second level coverage guys and pass rush, we struggled, but they were playing at noon coming from the West Coast, playing at noon in Jersey, and it didn't have that effect on them. I think the way Rutgers was playing, I expected that game to go the way it went in USC. I can't blame it on the time. I think going forward, we all know as Big Ten folks that these West Coast teams coming east and East Coast teams going west, when there are certain kickoff times, are going to be an advantage or disadvantage. I can't chalk that up to the travel. And I just want to piggyback one thing you said, Zach, before about these receivers. This is kind of the thing I'm talking about. We'll get to next season in the next segment, but it's like these receivers were young and maybe not quite ready, but these guys have that experience ascended them. And it's a shame how hard the schedule is going to be, because I think these guys are going to be really, really darn good. And I also think there's some question with the fan base as to whether we should have gone to those guys and gone to that quarterback earlier in the year, because actually I think the bread and butter where they are better was him throwing it around and these big bodied, really talented, fast guys going up for the ball and making plays was maybe should have been more their bread and butter on offense than it was. So just an interesting conversation about the season, whether they were forced to do maybe what they should have leaned on a little bit earlier by injuries or not. It's just interesting. It just didn't go great, but there's all kinds of caveats and nuance to it.
Yeah. Yeah. This is really great. We're going to take a quick commercial break, ad break, and then we're going to go to talking a little bit more about Mo Toure, and then we'll get into 2025. But let's just get a quick ad from Home Field, one of our sponsors here.
Home Field is your go-to destination for premium collegiate apparel with a passion for comfort and a flair for vintage design. Home Field brings you gear that is comfortable and stylish. With over 150 colleges to choose from, Home Field digs deep into the archives, uncovering forgotten logos, iconic mascots, and legendary moments to create one-of-a-kind apparel. Use my code TBTH for 15% off for new customers, or use my link in the description.
Back on the Big Ten Huddle. JR did join us for at least one segment here today. So, Mo Toure was one of my favorite players going into the season. And then obviously he got hurt. And it was a bummer that he got hurt. It was a second ACL injury. And then we find out, was it a week ago, that he was going to transfer out. Obviously, there's some speculation. There's a lot of smoke that Penn State might get him. I don't know if he's actually committed anywhere yet, but there's definitely at least some smoke about Penn State nabbing him. But Larry, I'd love to hear from your perspective. A, why do you think he left Rutgers? And B, like what do you expect from him as he moves on?
So there's a whole lot of debate and speculation within the Rutgers community right now about why he's leaving, what it means for him, what his outlook is as a player, regardless of whether he stayed or is he leaving. And there's some reporting on it. Now, the guys over at TKR, the Night Report, do a great job with Rutgers too. And it's Richie O'Leary and Mike Broadbent. And they have there's been reporting, that initially, he actually put a tweet up 2 weeks or so before the real news broke about a week ago, kind of as a farewell to Rutgers. And it took a lot of fans by surprise. It took everybody by surprise. Like, what's going on with Mo? Because if you recall, he got hurt, but then, at the end of the 24 season, he made an announcement. This wasn't just a silent, we don't know what he's going to do. He made an announcement. I'm coming back. Like, I'm coming for one more year. I have the eligibility. I'm returning to the banks. I'm returning to Rutgers, right? And all of a sudden, at the end of the transfer window, you see him make this announcement, and it catches a lot of people off guard. And there's speculation. Is it for the money? Is it a change of scenery? There's some reporting it's not just the money. He wanted a change of scenery. But here's the deal, right? He had multiple injuries. He had an ACL injury, I believe, early in his career. He came back from that, and that's when he was dominant. But then he had the other setback, which was prior to last year, which was another ACL injury. I don't know if it's the same leg. I don't know, the details in and out of it. But there's some speculation within the Rutgers community that perhaps with the injury history and the difficulties and the ruthlessness of pro football these days, that he does have a young family and that this might be his best window to earn some serious money in this new college era, especially if there's been chatter out there that he could get a significant, payout from one of these other schools. I think the original school was Miami, but now, he's visited other schools. The Penn State was in the mix. There was other reporting, some other ACC schools maybe he's going to visit, and he'll make a final decision relatively soon. There's some speculation from the Rutgers community that maybe he's trying to maximize his value right now, given his situation. As far as his, going forward, I think in the Rutgers community, and I don't think it's a secret, even if Toure is 75%, that's a huge thing for Rutgers still. Another program, maybe 75% Toure, is not as ideal and it's more depth, but those other programs might have more money to spend on a piece like that as opposed to Rutgers. Now, I do know, and I don't know this for a fact from inside reporting, but I know it knowing the program as well as I do and following it, that for him to take down the initial tweet and go back and forth, Rutgers clearly made some kind of significant push to keep him here, be that financially, be that other promises, etc. It didn't ultimately work. Obviously, guys got people in their corner and etc. This is something that now I think weighs on Rutgers fans a little bit, but, one of the things Rutgers has done under Schiano in the last few years, and that they have to do, given the state of where their program is and where they fit in the pecking order, they have to recruit guys who have a lot of upside, and not necessarily even universally ascertained upside, but upside that this particular staff sees in these guys. They have to recruit those guys, they have to develop them, and then they have to retain them. And that's got to be the model. They can fill a couple gaps with guys. They've done well with wide receivers, not as well with linemen, for instance, with transfers. But guys like Toure are the exact type of guys they got to bring in, turn into stars, and then keep. And it's a little bit nerve-wracking to see a guy like that who was all Rutgers all the time, really believed in it, developed here, seemed to really like it here, has a lot of respect for the coaching staff, say like, you know what, I can't turn down the other opportunities.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are. I don't think the fan base is nervous it's going to be a widespread thing just yet, but I think you have to kind of use your deductive reasoning and look around, and it's probably he had some stuff he just couldn't turn down. The opportunities were too big, and it's just last year he got a degree from Rutgers. So it's rare for Rutgers these days. I hope it stays rare. But I think all those factors may have played into it. There's no way to – it's a big loss for Rutgers. It remains to be seen whether he sets the world on fire at another school or not. But it's a big loss for Rutgers regardless.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds like a couple things that stood out as you're sharing. One, it sounds like this was very much Rutgers does not – like they're still confident in Toure and his ability. This isn't a matter of, well, we don't think he can play anymore, so it's okay that he walks out. It's like, no, we want you to stay, and they fought to keep him.
Yes.
But also it sounds like, and I think this is both the blessing and curse of NIL. Toure has obligations outside of football that he needs to be thinking about, and this could be one of the ways that he's able to take care of those obligations, which on one hand is like, well, that's a good thing, and at the same time it really stinks for the Rutgers faithful.
Yeah, it does. It's just a tough loss. It really is, and it's one of those things. Like, we've had guys in basketball, Paul Mulcahy goes, and there was some back and forth with the fan base there, whereas this didn't have any of that. But it hurts if the guy's been there for 4 years or 5 years, and he's a real stalwart of the program and of the university, and to see him go, we're lucky that it hasn't happened more with headlining players. But we were excited about him coming back. And that was one of the saving graces of the disappointment of last year was, well, hey, at least we got a guy next year that we thought would be out of eligibility. And now we don't have that. So
Yeah.
it stings. And it stings for Rutgers and the fans alike. And I have no doubt he's going to wind up somewhere that's best for him. And I'm curious on that team, depending on what team it is and what their wealth of resources is, how he fits in and how his recovery is and his explosiveness is. Coming off the leg injury. But let's face it, Zach, the team with the best view and ability to analyze him wanted to keep him. So they clearly think he's going to be back at least to some significant level of success. So it's tough for us in somebody else's game.
Yeah. Yeah. And they would have seen the rehab. They would have seen they would have seen where he's at. So I want to just get to a few comments here. One, we want to just thank Billy Tuesday for becoming a member. Thank you for doing that. That's really helpful for us. So thanks for doing that. Deonza ZZR, who is a Rutgers fan, is asking, this would have been year 7 for Mo, 2 season-ending injuries later. I understand he wants to try somewhere else, also get a max salary. Yep, yes. Understand that. And then also, they're just obligations equals a family. Yes. And by the way, I'm all pro, take care of your family, man. I think that's important. So, but yeah, it stinks. It stinks.
It's tough.
So, let's transition here. This is actually good and it kind of gets back before we move on. Penn State guy who we really appreciate here on the show. Penn State recently evaluated Toure's knee and he is 100% a take. He is 100% a take.
I really don't want him to go to Penn State.
I'll tell you, but what a story, and it stinks for Rutgers, but what a story it would be if he goes there and they win a national championship.
Right.
So our guy, Sean Morosi.
My dude, he linked us up. He's responsible for this. Dude.
He's like, how did I not know?
I don't know why. I talked to him today too, and that's what's funny. I literally talked to him today, but about different subjects, and I'm like, I was going to tell him, but I don't want to hound him about the podcast promotion. So I was like, I'm going to leave Sean. Sean can find it. He'll probably be on there, but I didn't want to hound him. Make sure you listen, Sean. So.
Well, Sean, we appreciate that you linked us together. You've made friends, and I still gotta get out there for a tailgate at some point.
You really do. Yeah, you definitely 100% do.
Yeah. Really. Well, speaking, maybe this season it can work, but what should we expect for this season? And by the way, if you have a question for Larry, make sure to pop it in the chat. Sean, it can't be, why didn't you tell me about this? That can't be the question. But if you have a question about Rutgers, about their personnel, feel free to pop it in the chat and we can talk about it. But Larry, first, while I do think the schedule is more difficult, and I do think we kind of missed a golden opportunity, there's still buzz, right? There's still buzz. I thought, the recruiting class for Rutgers standard was, I thought, really good. 38th overall, according to 247, 33 according to the composite, which I think is, solid for Rutgers. Transfer portal has been good. Getting DT Sheffield, I think, was probably one of the big standouts. Doug Blue Eli was another one that was a big standout in the transfer portal. So there's excitement around Rutgers. But to put it into context, we just did our post-spring power rankings. Both JR and I had Rutgers in the bottom half of the Big Ten, around 12th or 11th. So definitely optimism, progress. And yet, I think there's also the reality that Rutgers is now kind of in that climbing uphill state. So that's kind of where we see it. What say you?
So I think one of the most interesting developments over the last year or two is one of the biggest things that we were discussing within the Rutgers community was this, when I brought up this treading water, this successful season or this catastrophic failure season, a lot of the discussion centered around how does that affect momentum for program building in terms of attracting recruits, attracting transfers, et cetera. And I think there was a general feeling that, missing out on some huge splash of a season was going to stall momentum as far as attracting talent. And interestingly, quite the opposite has happened. Rutgers has really solidified, it seems, their ability to recruit the kids they want, to stay up there in the 30s in the recruiting class, to bring in transfers that are sought after, that fit what we want to do, and to retain, aside from Mo, most of the most talented guys we had on the team. And I think I was speaking to David Anderson, who's regularly on my Night Watch show now here and there. And he brought up a good point that really changed the way I see things. In this new era of NIL funds and selling the program and building the program almost as like a GM type, situation, Greg Schiano is uniquely situated to be able to do that. And from what I understand, he's gone out and he's gotten significant NIL contributions from people that may not even necessarily have a huge prior connection to Rutgers football. And with that NIL fund, while it's still not at the level of some of the juggernauts, while he's gotten that NIL fund and he's been able to sell the program and maintain through his ability to recruit guys at the inception coming out of high school who buy into the cultural aspect, like this is what we're selling. It's not necessarily blue blood. It's not necessarily the highest paid, but you're going to get your money. We also have, the academics and these other things and this family thing and the nurturing and the development as a man. And he has done a heck of a job at building and solidifying this culture to put together some really good players. Now, here's my thing about this season coming up. It's a difficult schedule, and there's no two ways about it. And when you look at, I think one of the reasons Rutgers fans were so dejected midway through last season, a lot of emphasis on UCLA, and I understand that, a lot of emphasis on the Illinois debacle. But one of the biggest games I thought that was pivotal for Rutgers fans that was deflating was the Wisconsin game. And that's because going into that game, I was on with Rajiv, from, talking Wisconsin. And we're both like, this is going to be a tough game for Wisconsin coming into Piscataway. And then for Wisconsin to just dominate the way they now people say there was a hangover from Nebraska. I understand all that, right? But that kind of reminded Rutgers fans that, no matter how far you think you've come, there are still these perennial Big Ten powers. And not even that Wisconsin was maintaining its status last year, but even without maintaining its status and kind of having a debacle of a year by Wisconsin standards, they still dominated Rutgers at home. And here's why I say all of that.
Yeah.
I actually think that some of these players, there are running backs that are going to step up for Kyle Monungai, who you're going to be like, you're going to know their names by the end of next season. They are talented. The line is still going to be pretty good. They lose a left tackle, which is huge, but they still have guys to step up. These receivers and this quarterback, if they play how I expect them to play, they are going to be very good. I really think these two wideouts, Ian Strong and KJ Duff, and you have other guys too, like Ben Black, these guys are going to make an impact. And some of these guys, Kaz Sanders and other guys on the defensive side of the ball, are also going to make impacts where there's an optimism because I think the team actually has added some depth, has developed some guys, and has strong talent, stronger than a lot of people think. On the other hand, games like Wisconsin were a reminder that if you look at this schedule, you can't get too far ahead of yourselves. I remember the Iowa game a few years ago. Their offense is terrible. We're going to go in there and like, no, they're still a perennial power in the trenches. Their defense stifled us. So I'm cautiously optimistic that the season will go better than I had thought at the conclusion of last season. I am also cautiously optimistic that because Schiano has been building this thing quietly, just like we saw the emergence of a passing game last year that was beyond formidable, really, that no one necessarily thought Rutgers was going to attain anytime soon. There may be a sneaky season where Rutgers comes out really without the expectation. Last year you had them and they went under them. Maybe there's a season where the expectations aren't that high, and Rutgers has put together this consistent, cohesive culture that it strikes one year and it's gotten over the hump. I'm not saying it's this year. Looking at the schedule, it's difficult, but I would say they're right. I'd put them right in the middle of the Big Ten, quite frankly. I have to go through the rankings but I think the season will be more respectable than a lot of people might think. And I'm excited to see, regardless of wins and losses, what kind of corners they turn, how the product on the field is in terms of going toe-to-toe with some of the tougher teams, or maybe winning an unexpected game, even if the schedule doesn't allow for getting to a bowl game. But even glancing at the schedule, there's winnable games there, especially early. Somebody in the chat said we could be 5-0. I'm not proclaiming it from the rooftops, but I could see it looking at the schedule. So I don't know, Zach. I'm intrigued by this offseason. I'm impressed by this coach's ability to foster and steward this team into this season.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I would to your point, I think Rutgers is solidifying. I think the other thing is the middle of the Big Ten, it's just similar to last year, is very there's not a ton of difference. So, and I'll get to that in a minute. One thing I just want to remind you guys, make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't liked already. Like the video and share it on socials. But they have Ohio, Miami of Ohio, and Norfolk State. They should be 3-0.
Yeah.
And you get Iowa at home, which I have a lot of questions about Iowa.
Right.
JR and I both do. And I have a lot of questions about Minnesota. I know Minnesota fans are mad, or not mad, but they were like, why are they not in the top half? Or why aren't they higher than 9th, I think, in JR's? And part of the reason why is because look at all that Minnesota's losing. Like they lose someone big on every level of their defense. They're losing a big receiver. They're losing Max Brosmer. And, you know, there's a lot of hype around Drake Lindsay, but man, we haven't seen any of it yet. So there's a lot of questions there. Like 5-0, I probably won't predict it, but like it's not out of the question. Like Iowa and Minnesota are both winnable games.
Yes.
And depending on what Washington team you get, now it's at Washington. That's a whole different beast.
Tough. Yes.
But like Washington's, you know, not, and I'm high on Washington. So like I say this saying I'm probably picking Washington to win that game, but they're not a world beater yet. Purdue, Maryland, those are winnable games.
Yeah, no, that's yeah.
And even Illinois, as high as I am on Illinois, like that, you know, and they kind of have a bye week before Illinois with Purdue. So there's winnable games on the schedule. And I think with what you're saying, there are definitely opportunities for Rutgers to surprise people, especially as they're kind of laying in wait, right? Yeah. Last year, everybody was singing their praises. I think Kirk Herbstreit had them as a dark horse playoff contender.
Yes, that's the thing. Yes.
Yeah. But this year, a lot of people aren't expecting it. I'm not expecting it. Right. But I think that's what might make this season actually more special for Rutgers.
That's kind of what I was getting at. So I appreciate you articulating it that way too, is like in a season where no one's necessarily high on them, whether it's this year or some other one, I could see this program sneaking up just because I have that intimate knowledge of who's in the program and the potential of some of these guys. I could see it happening, especially when, you know, like there's some games on this schedule where they're home games for Rutgers or road games that, you know, people are unsuspecting. All of a sudden you pile up some wins, and I'm not predicting some magical season, but a season that is respectable, that they're fighting for or get bowl eligibility, I don't necessarily think is out of the question. I think when you look at the schedule and these big teams catch your eye, you know, homecoming is Oregon, which was just by virtue of scheduling, had no way around it. It was announced at the spring game, but you look at the schedule, there's no real way around it. But you know, Iowa might be a Friday night game that benefits us. I think it'll be raw, you know, and then, you look at Ohio State and Penn State and you're like, oh, this is going to be painful. And it might be by then, but that doesn't mean the rest of the schedule is insurmountable. Yeah. So I'm curious what happens, especially with the expectations not necessarily there. Remember, we also lost our defensive coordinator who was highly regarded. Bring back Rob Smith, who didn't do as hot his last time around. So there's questions, but if they can rise up and surprise some people, I think a lot of Rutgers fans would be happy.
Yeah. I'll just go to the chat here for a minute. So our guy, Sean, said he thinks Mo Toure is going to UNC.
There is some new reporting that that's what I mentioned before, the ACC kind of winking at people. If you had to look at the ACC and pick out a coach that might be intriguing, there's one. So end of the day, from what I understand, he's still going to visit them. He's going to visit some other schools, and then he's going to make a decision. I don't know that I would put UNC as a favorite right now, but that's not because I have any inside knowledge. It's just looking at a team like Penn State, then looking at a team like Miami, some of the money, some of the tradition, some of the expectations they can bring to the table. Don't count the guy in UNC out for obvious reasons, but we will see.
It's like he's won a bunch of Super Bowls or something.
Yeah, maybe he knows defense. I don't know.
There you go.
Like players.
Yeah, Sean also says he thinks the team will be better this year. We'll have more depth. Thinks our power rankings are low. He has them 8th, which I'll tell you, I think as JR and I were talking, by the way, if you want to check out the power ranking show, it was last night. So make sure to go on YouTube. I think that the issue with the Big Ten power rankings is I think you have very clear tiers from like 1 to 4, 5 to 7, or 5 to 8. And then 9 to 12 are kind of they're all so like, but the lines are much slimmer than they were a year ago, particularly from the high end teams to the middle of the pack teams. And even like Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon and Illinois, people were giving me a lot of junk. I put Illinois ahead of Oregon, mostly because of what Illinois is bringing back. I think there's a lot of questions for Oregon. Certainly wouldn't be surprised if Oregon ascends throughout the year because of the talent that they have.
Right.
But there's a lot of questions with the power teams because they lost so much talent.
Yeah.
And which to me, I think that's one of the bad breaks for Rutgers' schedule is they get Oregon midseason, they get Ohio State second to last Saturday, they get Penn State at the end. It's like, come on, guys, put Ohio State.
Put them in when they're still figuring themselves out.
Yeah. Put Oregon at week 3, but yeah, so I think, but I do think it's hard to figure out where Rutgers should be. Mish had a good thought that I think you were getting to is will Rutgers transition to throwing the football more with the receivers being a lot better recently?
The answer is yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and the running backs are adept at catching to the ball. You're going to see more throwing the football from Rutgers. You saw it at the end of last season. It worked. You have a senior quarterback who they believe in, who's very comfortable in the system, who I believe in, who I wasn't totally sure on going into last season. I am definitely a believer in a lot of the things, tangibles and intangibles in the kid. Rutgers is going to be throwing the football. Yeah. Now, they're never going to be an air raid team, but they're going to throw the football quite a bit. You're going to see that.
Yeah. Well, and with those running backs and the offensive line, play action, hit them over the top. Like, I think that's a good strategy for them. Billy Tuesday, have some high-end high school talent in Jersey, need to tap in. Where do you think they're at there with the high school talent in New Jersey?
Well, you go back to Schiano the first stint, and he had gotten to a point where he was really successful, especially in the year right before he left, at keeping a lot of the top-rated Jersey guys home. And that was this point of emphasis, the state of Rutgers. It was, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, especially Eastern Pennsylvania, and then South Florida, which was, where a lot of the connections are culturally and where Schiano was familiar and all that. And it was really a matter of supplementing a Jersey hard-nosed roster with Florida speed in that first iteration. What I've actually seen as we go through the second iteration is we're doing respectably with keeping Jersey guys home, but it seems more to me to be the recruiting philosophy of Greg Schiano now and his staff seems to be, we're going to target the guys in Jersey that we really like and that fit the mold of what we want. And we, though, now have this Big Ten national brand and we have money to spend and the world is different. And now we've gotten to know some of these other states and we're playing there, and the state has expanded, the state of Rutgers, because of the Big Ten footprint. And they're going kind of all over the place. And they're going into different parts of the South in terms of the DMV, Maryland, D.C. area. They're going into the, Carolina area, Georgia. They're expanding the map. And so I don't even know how to really answer it accurately, because I wouldn't say that we're locking down the top 10 in Jersey every year, but I also wouldn't say that that's necessarily the highest point of emphasis in this new era of college football and where Rutgers is going. It's always been the story. Chris Ash had this fence the garden thing, and Jersey has a lot of talent. They have a lot of top end talent. That's true. And other states have deeper talent, but Jersey's not one of the slouch states. It has a lot of talent, but also the talent that's there sometimes is top heavy, and a lot of programs are rushing in to get it. Yeah. Then there's other gems lower down that have a certain level of grit. And since Rutgers is there to analyze and watch it more closely, they're able to pick guys out who are further down the list, but who turn out to be really great players. I mean, Shaquan Loyal, who got an undrafted contract, who played like 3 years as starter at safety for Rutgers from Westside High in Newark. These guys that they go in and get in Jersey, Loyal was rated pretty high. I mean, it wasn't like he was not, but he wasn't necessarily number one. So there's a balance of Jersey and recruiting that talent, but Rutgers is also expanding the map. And I think not so much rankings or ratings. Who can we piece together that I said before is going to fit the culture, stay and develop, be retained, and buy into this thing? We're going to go nationwide to find it.
Yeah, no, that's good. A few more comments here that I want to get to. Mish, I want to go back to Mish's question. Will Schiano be on the hot seat if Rutgers has an abysmal season? Like, say they go 4-8, 5-7. Like, what do you think happens with Schiano?
He's not going to be on the hot seat, because I think at the end of last season, when emotions were running high, some people would have argued for that. But the fact is, let's just talk about the reality first. Is Rutgers currently doesn't have an athletic director. They have an interim guy. They don't even have a university president, which as I understand it, we're going to get the president soon. Then they're going to start the AD search. It will be in place ideally by football season. But the reason I say that is Greg Schiano is a force in Jersey for so many reasons, and he's a force at Rutgers. And that buys him a heck of a lot of time and goodwill. When you get to, and look, there's a lot of Rutgers fans, and I understand this, because in some respect, I understand and share it, that we shouldn't be content with simply being bowl eligible or bubble, bowl team every year. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at the history and you look at recent history with Chris Ash and how terrible Rutgers was and how embarrassing it was for alumni and students alike, where we are is quite respectable, and I enjoy having a fighting chance in more games than not. And I enjoy like 3 home wins a year minimum, and I enjoy being on. And even in basketball, when we're happy, I'd be happy to be a bubble team. So the reason I say that is where he has us now by Rutgers standards isn't necessarily the be-all, end-all, I think, over time in the far future. But for right now, one setback in a 4-8 season after those 2 bowl appearances and a bowl win against Miami 2 years ago, and the culture that he's bringing, at the end of the day, that's going to buy him goodwill. On the other hand, one thing I'll say is somebody who's a more sophisticated Rutgers fan that analyzes them, who covers them. What I just said before about Schiano and how he's built this from a manager standpoint, the ability to get NIL funding, to recruit donors for that purpose, to manage the roster the way he is, that buys him even more time and credibility, because you built up something that would have been difficult at Rutgers that the other sports programs at Rutgers have struggled to do. And so for us to move on because of, especially in a conference like this, one down year of say 4-8, which would probably mean 1 win in conference, you're not going to be on the hot seat at that point. You string together a 4-8 season next year, and then another 4-8 season, or even a 5. And now some of these guys, Ian Strong, KJ Duff, these receivers, or these promising AJ Surace, the quarterback coming up behind Callie McManus, who had a great showing in the spring game. You bring up these guys and they fizzle out, or their best years pass them by in disappointing seasons, or these guys leave the program and don't ever realize the potential. Then you start to see a situation where Schiano's on the hot seat because what he's built doesn't look on solid ground anymore, doesn't look like his vision is getting us where we want to go. We're not there yet, even with a 4-8 season this year.
Yeah. And I think that goes back, like the season was a disappointment, but I think it's helpful to look at the scope. And I think Sean nailed it. Like, do you remember Chris Ash? Do we remember the Chris Ash era? Like, do we remember the Kyle Flood era? Right?
Yeah.
And again, you're in a much tougher conference now than Kyle Flood was ever in. And Chris Ash was in the Big Ten and he got murdered by the Big Ten. So you have to, I appreciate your perspective, because I think even last year, people were saying, oh, like Greg Schiano doesn't know how to get over the hump and everything. It's like, guys, he's the guy who put Rutgers on the map.
Yeah.
You can't look at a 7-6 season with all these injuries and say, well, this is not it. Like it just doesn't work that way. You can't do that. So I think it's just helpful to have that perspective. We're going to start wrapping up, but I want to just get a few more rapid fire comments here. Pistol Pete, going back to what you were saying about Rutgers kind of going to that Wisconsin game just really battered and bruised. He says Nebraska versus Rutgers last year was such a physical game. Both teams went on losing streaks after that. I think that's really true. Both teams really struggled after that game. Mish, who asked what happens if they're 4-8? He thinks 8-4 with losses to Oregon, Illinois, Ohio State, Penn State. Alibaba. Oh, so go ahead, Larry.
No, I could see it. You're giving me some optimism with that, and I know you're highlighting comments, but to shout out Sean there again, Ash was worse than Flood. I mean, Flood, I think, was continuing on a lot of what Schiano built initially. In that first season in the Big Ten, they went 8-4 and destroyed UNC in the bowl game. So yeah, Ash took us to depths unheard of, but I still think it speaks to, yes, we shouldn't be content to rest on our laurels when you have such a blunder. Like the Illinois game was on coaching, and Greg's got to get that cleaned up. But it's going to take more than that one blunder or a whole season to have them gone. And that's my point about it.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to progress.
Yes.
But you've seen progression on the whole. It's just that step has to be fixed. So yeah, which I totally agree. Alibaba, friend of the program, says Minnesota has a bye before Rutgers. He's a Minnesota fan, by the way. Says PJ Fleck is elite with a bye week to prepare. Just saying. So I think that's a warning shot, Larry. I think he's saying Minnesota's got Rutgers' number. Do you have anything to say to that?
Well, look, I would say I understand. PJ Fleck, of course, is elite after the bye week. He gets it from Greg Schiano, which was his mentor, and maybe still his daddy. I don't know. But I also think, look, Rutgers has some revenge games on that schedule for other teams. Washington, Minnesota, they're going to want to take a bite out of Rutgers, and that's one of the things I'm wary of. I think there'll be good games, and I don't think Rutgers fans, while I could be more optimistic than I was a few months ago, and while I appreciate the optimism of the 8-4 prediction and all these other things, we can't get ahead of ourselves. Let's see how the first, quarter and 5-6 games of the season plays out before we get real excited. So
yeah. Last comment from our friend Philip. Kyle Monangai, 7th round steal for the Bears. What'd you think of the Rutgers draft? And yeah, just talk about Kyle Monangai falling to the Bears.
I really was. So I talked about this on my pro football show, but I was a little bit, actually, I think I talked about it on the Rutgers show, but about pro football. I was not as, I guess I haven't been in a couple of years as dialed into the NFL draft as I had been in recent, before that. I think because they're not always in New York. It's not just a few nights or 2 days. Now it's like 4 days and they're all over the place. And guys are getting paid in NIL. So there's not this huge life-changing moment all the time like it used to be when you sign your contract, you get the phone call. Now all of a sudden you get all this financial windfall. It's like, so it doesn't have the same allure as it used to for me. But the reason I say that is it had even less allure this year when Rutgers fell so far. I actually thought you were going to see Kyle go a little bit higher. I thought you were going to see Holland Pierce go a little bit higher. Eventually, Robert Longerbeam broke the seal and he went. But I was a bit surprised by a few of the guys either not going or going low. I think some of them wound up in good spots. I do think Kyle is an absolute steal for the Chicago Bears. Look, the kid was discounted and undercounted coming out of high school when Berger was supposed to be the be-all, end-all, the running backs coming out of high school. And Kyle Monangai was a head down, lunch pail guy who some people predicted might even be better. I remember the first time I saw him run in a game, and it wasn't like he was dominating, but I could see the running style and the relentlessness and the persistence of his running style with just the shoulders down, legs churning into the hole. And I was like, I think he might actually wind up being pretty good. And then the second year he was developing, but then he just took off. I think, look, this is a guy who was leading the Big Ten one year. This is the guy who hasn't fumbled in his entire football college career. That's not like small potatoes in any sense of the word. Whatever his measurables are, whatever people thought, this is a kid who consistently rises to the challenge. Pacheco was not, I didn't even come into the Kansas City Chiefs necessarily hailed as the heir apparent to their running back tradition, but look at him. I think Kyle Monangai is going to have a very respectable pro career, and I think that Chicago made a great pick. I think it was a steal that late in the draft. I would never count this kid out, and I just think he has a certain intangible ability that's going to get him where he wants to go, even in the pros.
Yeah. And to your point, 7th-round running backs from Rutgers do fairly well in the NFL. Isaiah Pacheco, 2023, he had 205 carries for 935 yards, 7 touchdowns for the Super Bowl winning Kansas City Chiefs. So you heard it here first. Kyle Monangai is leading the Bears to a Super Bowl championship.
I love
it. I need to buy back some goodwill from the Bears fans. I said that the Bears suck last week, so I got to get some goodwill here. Yeah, I think to echo, I was surprised. Like Holland Pierce didn't get drafted. I was a little surprised by that.
I was very surprised. Went to the Eagles. So, and the story there, Zach, just so you know, is from what we hear, the Eagles said they wanted him. They spent a significant amount of their undrafted free agent money on him. Obviously, going to a place that values linemen. However, they also took 2 other tackles, I believe, towards the end of the draft. So I'm confident he's going to land somewhere, even if he doesn't stick with Philly. But that's a good spot for him. I was surprised he didn't get drafted, though. I was.
Yeah. A lot of guys that could get drafted in the future, though. And I think it was in the chat. It was a sentiment in the chat that Schiano getting back to producing NFL talent. And I think that is another sign that Rutgers is progressing. And I think if you are able to sell the NFL, that helps your NIL, that helps your program, that helps your mantra of being a developmental program. So things are going really well. I'm going to ask you one last question, and then I'll get you out of here. Way too early, 2025 season prediction for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. What would you say the record's going to be as of May, 4 months before the season starts?
I'm going to go with what this optimism that Greg Schiano gives me, and I'm going to predict that they go 7-5 and repeat their record of the past 2 years. I think they pull a victory out that no one expects, and I think they're solid the rest of the way, winning some of their home games and taking care of business when they should win. I would think that if you're taking care of business, you could say you got 4 wins right there. So now it's a matter of getting 3. If you were going to make me bet, I'd probably go down towards 6-6. But being a little optimistic, the way this chat went, the way I ponder things, I'm going to give a 7-5 prediction this early, reserving the right to change that as we get closer to the season and lock in official predictions. But that's my springtime prediction.
Yeah. So 7-5 is the total. I think if you look at the past 3 years and you're saying they've had 7 wins, 3 consecutive years in arguably the toughest conference, obviously 2 years ago, I think we talked about this. 6-6 in the Big Ten East, the old Big Ten East, was insane.
Yeah.
Like for Rutgers, it was insane.
Yeah.
And then 7-5, which was viewed as a disappointment. And then to go 7-5 with this schedule, which is it's not murderer's row, but it's not easy.
Right.
Like it's not
at
easy.
all. No, it's not. No.
And to think that, okay, 7-5 with this schedule, if they do that, I think you got to give some major props to Coach Schiano and that coaching staff and that roster.
Yes. Yeah, 150%. I think too, I'm putting a lot when you have a senior quarterback who I think is formidable. That counts for a lot. I know you're going up against a lot of talent, and that's why I'm not predicting like a world-beating epic season. But when you got a senior quarterback who, with an OC he trusts and a coach he trusts, with some good receivers, who has moxie, you got to give him some credit, and I'm giving him that benefit of the doubt right now.
Yep. Good stuff, Larry. Tell the good fine folks where they can find you.
You can find me at Night Watch, spelled like a knight from the medieval times. Night Watch Larry K. Type that in your Google. Type that in your YouTube search engine. Right there, you see it. Larry K. Night Watch. Go over to my YouTube and click subscribe. Join me, and for all your Rutgers information during the season. I also like to have guys from other teams come on and talk about matchups and things like that. So there's a lot of great content over there. Check me out. And it's also available as an audio podcast anywhere you get your podcasts on the way to work. Whatever it is, at work, driving, tune into Night Watch and join me over there. I welcome all fans and all commentary, and we're really still building it out. So I look forward to seeing you over there. And Zach, thanks as always for the opportunity. It was a blast. Always fun. Always great to chop it up with you about the Big Ten and Rutgers. And so I had an excellent time.
Yeah. Well, we love having you on the show. We'll do it again. We'll get you in hopefully on one of these shows where we during game week where we'll get your thoughts on some things.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah.
And get out to a tailgate, will you?
Yeah. I got it. Well, we'll get off air and then we'll talk about that. So guys, thanks so much for hanging out with us tomorrow night. Make sure we're talking about top 25s, where I'm sure JR and I were going to get roasted for what we think. And then Friday, join us for our mega episode. Larry, you would appreciate this. We are doing the most absurd, ridiculous thing on Friday, which is we're going to determine which Big Ten coach would win a hypothetical wrestling tournament.
I love this.
And not like Greco-Roman wrestling, but like WWE style wrestling.
Oh, now I love it even more. All right.
So
I'll be watching that one.
Yeah. So Friday night at 9, make sure you check it out. We will see you there. Take care, everybody.
Bye, guys.